Arrival shock. Have you ever worked so hard for something, imagined it for years, and then, when it finally happens, you feel nothing like you expected? Not excitement. Not pride. Just a quiet pressure in your chest, like your brain is whispering, "Are you sure you belong here?" That was me, standing in an American airport 2 weeks ago, holding my bag, smiling on the outside, while my nervous system was absolutely panicking on the inside. This video is not about perfect English. It's about what happens before confidence, before fluency, before you believe you can stay and still be yourself. I arrived in the United States on a clear morning. The sky was wide, very blue, almost too perfect. In movies, this is the moment when everything begins. In real life, this is the moment when your body realizes you are very far from home. My English was okay. I could read. I could listen. I could speak slowly. But none of that prepared me for the first shock. The silence inside my head disappeared. My brain was suddenly loud. Too loud. Psychologists call this culture shock, but that sounds polite. What it really is cognitive overload. Your brain is forced to process thousands of unfamiliar signals at the same time. Accents, rules, facial expressions, distances, even how close people stand to you. The amygdala, the fear center of your brain, does not care that this is your dream country. It only knows one thing: new equals danger. So it hits the alarm. At immigration, the officer smiled and said, "How's it going?" Simple sentence. Very common. I froze for half a second. Not because I didn't understand the words, but because my brain was translating, checking tone, guessing intention, and searching for the correct answer at the same time. This is the hidden enemy when you learn English through life, not textbooks. Real English does not wait for you to be ready. I answered, "Good, thank you." He nodded. Done. 5 seconds. But my heart was racing like I had just taken an exam. This is important for you to hear. That reaction is not weakness. It is biology. Your nervous system is trying to protect you while you are learning a new language, a new culture, and a new version of yourself, all at once. Outside the airport, the air felt different. Drier. Cooler. The sun felt sharp on my skin. Climate seems like a small thing, but it matters more than you think. Studies show that changes in temperature and humidity can affect mood, sleep, and concentration. When your body is uncomfortable, your brain learns slower. So if you ever feel stupid or slow when practicing English abroad, ask yourself first, did I even sleep well? Did my body adapt yet? On the drive to where I would stay, everything felt big. The roads were wide. The cars were quiet. People followed rules in a calm, almost emotionless way. No shouting. No chaos. No familiar noise. My brain missed the disorder it was used to. Humans are strange like that. We find safety in what we know, even if it stressed us before. That night, I lay in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. My mind replayed small moments on repeat. Did I sound strange? Did I smile too much? Too little? Should I have said something else? This is another invisible part of learning English through real life, rumination. When you operate in a second language, your brain keeps reviewing conversations, trying to fix them. This burns energy fast. Here's a practical tip you can use even if you're not in the US. When this happens, speak one simple English sentence out loud before sleeping. Something like, "Today was hard, but I am learning." Speaking slowly, calmly, tells your brain that language is not danger, it is control. Neuroscience shows that slow speech activates the parasympathetic nervous system, helping you relax. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt a strange distance. Same face. Same person. Different context. This is where many people quit. Not just English, but the dream itself. Because motivation dies when identity feels unstable. You start asking, if I adapt, will I lose who I am? But here is the quiet truth I learned in those first hours. Adaptation does not erase you. It reveals you. Under pressure. Under uncertainty. Under a foreign language. That first day in America did not make me confident. It made me honest. Honest about fear. Honest about limits. Honest about how real English lives inside real discomfort. And that honesty became the starting point, not the failure. Because the story doesn't begin when you feel ready. It begins when you arrive anyway. Climate confusion. Have you ever felt tired for no clear reason, like your brain was running on low battery even though you didn't do anything difficult? That was my second day in the United States. Nothing dramatic happened. No big mistakes. No culture clash on the surface. And yet, my body felt wrong, heavy, slow, slightly disconnected. This is the kind of problem people never talk about when they tell you to just practice English every day. Because sometimes, the problem is not your motivation. It's your climate. The weather where I stayed was colder than I expected, but not in a violent way. It was quiet cold. Dry air. Blue sky. Low humidity. In my home country, the air hugs your skin. Here, it steps back. That distance changes how you breathe, how your throat feels, how your voice sounds. When I spoke English, my mouth felt dry faster. My pronunciation felt different. Subtle but real. Science backs this up. Dry air reduces moisture in your vocal cords, which can make speech feel more effortful. When speaking feels harder, your brain interprets it as stress. Stress raises cortisol. Cortisol blocks learning. So you think you're bad at English today, when actually, your body is still negotiating with the weather. That morning, I went outside for a short walk. The sun was bright but weak. It looked warm, but it wasn't. Americans love this kind of weather. I could see it in how relaxed people looked, walking with coffee cups, wearing light jackets, moving without rush. I felt like a guest in someone else's season. This is where culture hides. In climate preferences. In many parts of the US, people plan life around weather. They check forecasts like habits. They talk about it casually, constantly. Nice day, right? Crazy weather. These are not empty sentences. They are social bridges. If you ignore them, you miss connection. If you don't understand them, you feel invisible. I remember a woman at a small store smiling and saying, "Beautiful morning, huh?" My brain wanted to answer with facts. Temperature, wind, humidity. Instead, I smiled and said slowly, "Yes, it feels calm." Her smile widened. That was it. 2 seconds of English. But my nervous system relaxed. Because connection happened. Here's something important for your listening practice. Simple weather talk is not small talk. It's emotional regulation. Researchers in social psychology show that predictable, low-risk conversations help strangers feel safe. And when you feel safe, you learn faster. So when you practice English, don't skip the boring topics. They're not boring to your brain. By afternoon, my energy crashed. Jet lag plus climate change equals mental fog. I tried to read English news on my phone and realized I was rereading the same sentence again and again. If this has ever happened to you, don't push harder. That's a trap. Cognitive science shows that learning under fatigue creates negative emotional memory. Your brain starts associating English with exhaustion. Instead, I did something very small. I sat near a window, drank water, and listened to slow English. Just one short story, no subtitles. Not to understand everything. Just to let the sound exist. This matters because your brain learns language in layers. First rhythm. Then intonation. Meaning comes later. Climate also affects mood in quieter ways. In places with less humidity and more open space, emotions can feel flatter. Not sad. Just less intense. For someone used to expressive environments, this can feel lonely. And loneliness is dangerous for language learners. It makes you turn inward. It makes you silent. That evening, I noticed something interesting. My thoughts started forming in simpler English. Not full sentences. Just fragments. Cold air. Too quiet. Miss noise. This is not regression. This is adaptation. Neurolinguists call this interlanguage, the bridge state where your brain is reorganizing. It feels uncomfortable because your identity is being temporarily simplified. But simplification is how systems learn. Muscles grow by tearing slightly. Brains grow by destabilizing patterns. Climate shock accelerates this process, whether you like it or not. Here's a practical exercise you can steal from this moment. Describe the weather in one sentence every day, out loud in English. Not fancy. Honest. Today feels heavy. The air is sharp. This connects language to your body. Embodied learning sticks longer. By the end of day 2, I stopped blaming myself for feeling off. I stopped asking, "What's wrong with my English?" and started asking, "What is my body adapting to today?" That single question changed my patience level instantly. Climate confusion is not a distraction from learning English. It is part of the lesson. And once you stop fighting it, your English stops fighting you back. Language reality check. Have you ever felt confident about your English until a real person opened their mouth? Not in a classroom. Not on an app. A real human, speaking fast, relaxed, and emotionally loaded. That was my third wake-up call in the United States. Day 3. The day I realized something uncomfortable. My English was correct, but it wasn't alive yet. It happened in a small cafe. Nothing special. Just coffee, quiet music, people working on laptops like they do in every American movie. The barista smiled and said, "What can I get started for you?" I understood every word. Grammar? Fine. Vocabulary? Fine. But my brain still froze for a second. Because no textbook ever prepared me for how casually Americans speak when nothing is wrong. I answered slowly, carefully, "I would like a coffee, please." Polite. Clear. Safe. She nodded, but her energy shifted just a little. Not rude. Just neutral. Then the guy behind me said, "Can I do a large iced extra shot?" No hesitation. No politeness formula. Just rhythm. That's when it hit me. Real English in America is not about correctness. It's about efficiency and emotional tone. People speak to move life forward, not to prove anything. And when your English carries the weight of fear, people feel it, even if they don't judge you for it. This moment crushed a small illusion I didn't know I had, that one day, English would suddenly feel easy. But language doesn't flip like a switch. It sheds layers. Slowly. Awkwardly. From a neuroscience perspective, this makes sense. When you speak your second language, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning and control, works overtime. Native speakers use more automatic brain regions. That's why your English feels heavy while theirs feels light. Not because you're worse. Because you're working harder. Later that day, I had a short conversation with a neighbor. He asked, "You settling in okay?" Simple question. Friendly tone. My brain wanted to answer perfectly. Instead, I said something imperfect but honest, "I'm learning." Slowly but yes. He smiled and said, "That's how everyone does it." That sentence did something powerful. It removed performance. It turned English from a test into a tool. This is a psychological shift many learners never make. They wait to be ready before using English naturally. But readiness is created by usage, not before it. Here's a practical truth you can use today. Fluency grows from permission, not pressure. Give yourself permission to sound simple. Permission to pause. Permission to be human in English. That afternoon, I listened to conversations around me. Not to understand every word, but to feel the shape of the language. Americans drop words. They shorten sounds. They let sentences die halfway. This isn't laziness. It's trust. Trust that the other person will fill in the gaps. Textbooks teach completeness. Real life teaches cooperation. I noticed how often people used emotional fillers. "Yeah, right, exactly, I get it." These words don't carry information. They carry connection. If you want your English to feel more natural, start there. Say less, but respond more. Psycholinguistic studies show that back-channel responses, small verbal signals, make speakers feel heard and reduce social tension. That means even limited English can feel fluent if you use it strategically. That evening, I practiced a small habit. When someone spoke to me, I focused on responding emotionally first, linguistically second. A nod. A yeah. A smile. Then words. This lowered my anxiety instantly. Because communication happened before perfection. But there was still frustration. At night, my inner critic returned. It whispered, "You should be better by now." This voice is dangerous. It compares progress to fantasy, not reality. Learning in your home country is one thing. Learning inside the culture is another. Language learning researchers call this the reality gap, the distance between academic competence and social competence. And everyone falls into it. The difference is whether you climb out or build a home inside self-doubt. Here's a grounded strategy. Record yourself telling a simple story in English every day. Not to share. Just to listen. You will hear growth before you feel it. The brain often updates last. By the end of day 3, I stopped asking, "Is my English good enough?" and started asking, "Did I connect today?" That question changes everything. Because connection is the true measure of language. Real English doesn't demand perfection. It asks for presence. And once you show up, imperfect, accented human, English meets you halfway. Daily life friction. Have you ever felt exhausted after doing nothing important? No big conversations. No emotional drama. Just small moments that somehow drained you completely. That was day 4 in America for me. The day I learned that culture shock doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers through daily life. Quiet, repetitive, and relentless. It started with something simple. Crossing the street. The light turned green. Cars stopped. Everyone waited. No honking. No rushing. My body hesitated, confused by the calm. Back home, crossing a street is a negotiation. Here, it's a contract. And my nervous system had not read the terms yet. This is what psychologists call microfriction. Tiny mismatches between expectation and reality that require constant adjustment. Each one costs a little mental energy. Alone, they are nothing. Together, they are exhausting. Inside a grocery store, I stood staring at shelves for too long. 20 kinds of milk. Almond. Oat. Lactose-free. Organic. Extra calcium. My brain wasn't choosing milk. It was translating culture. Choice here is freedom, but also responsibility. In many American systems, you are expected to decide quickly and confidently. Hesitation feels out of place. A man behind me waited patiently. No pressure. But that made it worse. I rushed, chose the wrong thing, and felt strangely embarrassed. Not because of him. Because of me. Here's the science behind this. When you live in a new culture, your decision fatigue skyrockets. Even automatic tasks become conscious. Research shows that decision fatigue reduces self-control, emotional regulation, and language performance. That's why your English sounds worse at the end of the day. Not because you forgot it, but because your brain is tired of choosing. Later, I tried to make a phone call. Simple task. But phone English is different. No facial quiz. No gestures. Just sound. The voice on the other end spoke quickly, efficiently, without emotional padding. My brain panicked. I asked her to repeat. She did, slower, kinder. Still, I hung up feeling defeated. This is where many learners make a mistake. They blame their listening skills. But often, the problem is context loss. Your brain relies on visual and cultural cues to predict meaning. On the phone, those disappear. So anxiety rises. Anxiety blocks comprehension. A practical tip: if phone calls stress you, practice with recorded voices first. Voicemail messages. Automated menus. This trains your brain to process sound without visual backup. It's not about vocabulary. It's about tolerance. By afternoon, small things kept stacking up. How to say, "Excuse me" in tight spaces. How long to make eye contact. How loudly to speak. None of these rules are written. You learn them by making mistakes. And mistakes, even small ones, bruise the ego. This is where daily life becomes emotional. Not sad. Just heavy. You start missing home, not because it was better, but because it was predictable. Predictability is comfort. Comfort is energy. And energy is what language learning needs most. I noticed my English becoming shorter. Less expressive. Not because I couldn't say more, but because I didn't want to risk friction. This is dangerous. When you minimize yourself to survive, growth slows. Social psychologists call this self-silencing, reducing expression to avoid conflict or embarrassment. It protects you short-term but costs you long-term confidence. That evening, I made a small decision. I would allow one awkward moment per day. Just one. On purpose. A strange sentence. A slow response. A visible accent. This reframed mistakes as planned exposure instead of failure. Exposure therapy works because it teaches the brain that fear is survivable. The same principle applies to language. Controlled discomfort builds resilience. The next time I spoke, I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I let silence exist. And nothing bad happened. In fact, the conversation felt more real. Daily life in America taught me something unexpected. Efficiency is valued, but authenticity is respected. People don't need you to be smooth. They need you to be clear. By the end of day 4, I wasn't fluent. I was tired. But I was learning where the real battle was, not in grammar books, but in tiny daily decisions. Language friction is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're living inside the language. And once you stop fighting the friction, it slowly starts smoothing you instead. Policy meets life. Have you ever felt stressed without knowing why, like something invisible was pressing on your chest? Not a person. Not a problem you could name. Just a quiet tension in the background. That was day 5 for me in the United States. The day I realized that culture shock is not only emotional or linguistic. Sometimes, it is administrative. In America, policies are not abstract ideas. They live inside your daily routine. Forms, rules, appointments, identification. Everything works, smoothly, efficiently, but only if you understand the system. And understanding the system requires language, patience, and trust in procedures you did not grow up with. That morning, I had to handle a small task. Nothing dramatic. Just paperwork related to daily life. But the moment I looked at the form, my brain tightened. Not because the English was difficult. The words were simple. The problem was responsibility. In the US, when you sign something, you own it. Fully. Personally. In many cultures, systems are flexible. You ask. You explain. You negotiate. In America, systems are clear and indifferent. They don't argue with you. They don't explain themselves emotionally. They simply exist. And that can feel cold if you're not used to it. Psychologists call this institutional culture shock. Your brain is not only learning language, but also learning how power, rules, and trust operate in a new society. This creates stress because mistakes feel expensive. Not emotionally, legally. I remember reading a line that said, "By signing, you certify that the information is true and correct." Simple sentence. But my heart rate increased. What if I misunderstood something? What if my English missed a detail? Fear like this makes people avoid tasks, not because they are lazy, but because their nervous system associates them with danger. This fear affects language learning deeply. Studies show that anxiety reduces working memory capacity. That means when you're stressed, you literally process fewer words. So official English feels harder, not because it is, but because your brain is in protection mode. Later that day, I noticed how Americans talk about policies casually. You just file it online. It's automatic. The system updates. These sentences carry trust. People believe the system will do its job if they do theirs. That trust is learned over time. For newcomers, the gap is painful. You are expected to be independent immediately. No hand-holding. No reminders. Freedom and responsibility arrive together. Here's a practical strategy that helped me. Separate language difficulty from system anxiety. When reading a policy or form, read it twice. First, only for meaning. Second, for emotion. Ask yourself, what is this asking me to do, not how does it make me feel? This reduces fear and increases clarity. In the afternoon, I observed families around me. Parents discussing school rules, healthcare options, insurance terms. Their conversations were calm, almost boring. But beneath that calm was competence. They knew the system. That knowledge gave them peace. For immigrants or learners, this is where English becomes more than communication. It becomes access. And access changes your sense of control. I also noticed how policy language in America avoids emotion. It is direct, neutral, precise. This style influences how people speak in daily life. Less indirectness, less apology, more clarity. When you bring emotional language into policy situations, it feels out of place. Understanding this changed how I spoke. Instead of explaining myself, I focused on stating facts. Short sentences. Clear answers. My English felt colder, but my confidence grew. This is an important lesson. English changes depending on power context. Romantic English is warm. Friendly English is soft. Policy English is clean. If you mix them, friction happens. That evening, I practiced reading official English out loud. Slowly. Not to memorize, but to normalize the tone. When your brain hears something often enough, it stops fearing it. By the end of day 5, I felt something shift. Not comfort, but respect. Respect for a system that demands clarity. And respect for myself for stepping into it without fully understanding it yet. Policies in America are not designed to scare you. They are designed to work. And when you learn to meet them with calm, clear English, something powerful happens. You stop feeling like a guest. You start feeling like a participant. Cultural distance. Have you ever spoken to someone, nodded at the right moments, used the correct words, and still walked away feeling misunderstood? Not offended. Not rejected. Just unseen. That was day 6 for me in the United States. The day I realized that culture is not what people say. It's what they assume you already know. I was in a casual conversation. Friendly. Light. Nothing serious. Someone asked, "So, what do you do?" Simple question. I answered honestly, with context, with background, with explanation. When I finished, there was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet. Then they said, "Oh, nice." And the conversation gently ended. At first, I blamed my English. Maybe I spoke too long. Maybe I chose the wrong words. But later, I understood something deeper. In American culture, conversation often values brevity over completeness. People expect you to summarize yourself quickly, then expand only if invited. This is cultural distance. Not conflict. Distance. Anthropologists explain this using high-context and low-context cultures. Many Asian and Latin cultures are high-context. Meaning is shared, layered, implied. American culture is low-context. Meaning is explicit, efficient, and time-aware. When you bring high-context communication into a low-context environment, it can feel heavy. When Americans bring low-context communication into high-context cultures, it can feel cold. Neither is wrong. But mismatch creates misunderstanding. I noticed this pattern everywhere. Invitations that were not really invitations. "We should hang out sometime" meant, "I'm being polite," not let schedule. Compliments that were direct but brief. Feedback that was honest but emotionally neutral. My brain kept asking, do they like me or not? The answer was often, that's not the question they're answering. Social neuroscience shows that the brain craves clarity in social signals. When signals are ambiguous, anxiety rises. And anxiety interferes with language processing. So you replay conversations, searching for meaning that may not exist. Here's a powerful shift I made. I stopped interpreting tone emotionally and started interpreting functionally. What is this sentence doing? Ending a conversation? Keeping it light? Showing respect? This reduced emotional noise instantly. For your English practice, this matters. Understanding function is more important than understanding every word. Ask yourself, what is happening socially right now? Not what did I miss linguistically? That afternoon, I observed how Americans handle disagreement. Soft voice. Clear words. No long explanations. I see it differently. That's it. No emotional build-up. No justification. At first, this felt dismissive. Later, it felt freeing. In many cultures, disagreement threatens harmony. In American culture, clarity protects efficiency. Once you accept this, conversations feel less personal and less painful. I also noticed humor works differently. Sarcasm is subtle. Self-deprecation is common. Emotional storytelling exists, but it's often saved for closer relationships. If you open your heart too fast, people don't know where to place it. This is not rejection. It's pacing. Here's a practical technique. Mirror length before mirroring depth. Match how long people speak before matching how much they reveal. This keeps conversations balanced and reduces cultural friction. That evening, I felt lonely in a strange way. Surrounded by people. Friendly faces. But still distant. This is the hardest part of adaptation. The space between interaction and intimacy. Psychologists call this social liminality, being between belonging and observing. It's uncomfortable, but temporary. I reminded myself, connection in America is built through repetition, not intensity. Small talk today. Shared activity tomorrow. Trust later. My English adjusted naturally when my expectations adjusted. I spoke less emotionally, more clearly. And surprisingly, people leaned in more. Cultural distance doesn't mean you don't fit. It means you're still learning the rhythm. And once you stop forcing your old rhythm into a new song, the music starts to make sense. Love under pressure. Have you ever argued with someone you love, not because of what they said, but because of everything you couldn't explain fast enough? That was day 7 for me in the United States. The day when culture shock stopped being external and walked straight into my relationship. Love doesn't protect you from stress. It amplifies it. When two people experience the same shock differently, distance appears. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet. Confusing. One person adapts by talking less. The other adapts by talking more. And suddenly English, or the lack of it, becomes a third person in the room. That morning, we were both tired. Different sleep cycles. Different emotional rhythms. I wanted silence. They wanted clarity. Simple needs, wrong timing. The conversation started small, practical, then slowly slid into frustration. This is where language learning becomes dangerous, not academically, but emotionally. Because when your emotional vocabulary in English is limited, you default to efficiency. Short sentences. Flat tone. And flat tone, in a relationship, sounds like indifference. Research in relationship psychology shows that emotional misalignment increases under environmental stress. Add language barriers, and the brain switches to defense. You stop listening. You start protecting. I noticed myself choosing safe words instead of true ones. It's fine. I'm okay. These sentences are emotional lies we tell to avoid complexity. In English, they sound polite. In love, they sound distant. My partner sensed it. Not the words, the absence behind them. Here's something no one tells you about love in a new culture. You don't fight about culture. You fight about dishes, schedules, tone. Culture hides inside those details. We sat quietly for a moment. Then something changed. I stopped trying to sound fluent and started trying to sound honest. Slowly, carefully, I said, I feel smaller here. I'm learning, but I'm tired. The grammar wasn't perfect. The pause was long. But the truth landed. Neuroscience explains why. When you speak emotionally, even imperfectly, the listener's mirror neurons activate. Connection happens beyond language. Fluency matters less than vulnerability. From that moment, the conversation shifted. We weren't solving problems. We were syncing nervous systems. This is a key lesson for English learners in relationships. Emotional fluency is not vocabulary size. It's timing, tone, and courage. Later that day, I thought about how American culture approaches love. Directness is valued. Boundaries are respected. Independence is expected. For couples from more interdependent cultures, this can feel cold or lonely. In America, needing space is healthy. In other cultures, space feels like withdrawal. When you don't understand this difference, misunderstandings multiply. Here's a practical exercise that helped us, naming the pressure instead of the problem. Instead of saying, "You don't listen," we said, "This environment is heavy today." This shifts blame away from the person and toward the context. Studies on conflict resolution show that externalizing stress reduces defensiveness and increases cooperation. It works in any language. That evening, we took a walk. No problem solving. Just movement. Walking side by side reduces emotional intensity and increases conversational ease. The brain relaxes when the body moves. We spoke in simple English. Short sentences. Honest ones. No speeches. No explanations. I realized something important. Love adapts faster than language. If you let it. You don't need perfect English to protect a relationship. You need awareness of pressure and permission to be imperfect together. By the end of day 7, the tension didn't disappear, but it softened. And softness is where connection grows. Culture shock will test your love, not by breaking it, but by asking whether you can stay kind while everything feels unfamiliar. Family adjustment. Have you ever watched the people you love adapt faster or slower than you, and felt a strange mix of pride and panic at the same time? That was day 8 for me in the United States. The day I realized that culture shock doesn't move at one speed. It splinters. And in a family, everyone carries a different piece. Families don't migrate as one unit. Bodies arrive together. Minds don't. That morning, I noticed how differently we were responding to the same environment. One person was curious, asking questions, smiling at strangers. Another was quiet, observant, conserving energy. Another adapted through routine. Same coffee, same walk, same time every day. None of these were wrong. But the differences created tension. Psychologists call this asynchronous adaptation. Each family member processes change through their own coping style. The problem isn't difference. The problem is expectation. We assume adjustment should look similar. It never does. In the US, family life feels structured around systems. School schedules. App notifications. Appointments planned weeks ahead. Even family time often has a calendar slot. For some people, this feels safe. For others, it feels mechanical. I watched parents talk calmly with children, using explanation instead of authority. Choices were offered early. Do you want this or that? Independence is trained young. This cultural value runs deep. It shapes how children speak, decide, and disagree. For families from more hierarchical cultures, this can feel unsettling. Respect looks different. Obedience sounds different. Love is expressed through structure instead of sacrifice. Language plays a hidden role here. Children adapt linguistically faster than adults. Their brains are wired for pattern absorption. They pick up accent, rhythm, slang, sometimes before parents can follow. This creates a subtle power shift. When children become cultural translators, parents can feel left behind. Not logically, but emotionally. Research in family psychology shows that role reversal increases stress if not acknowledged. Parents may feel loss of authority. Children may feel pressure. And English sits quietly in the middle, changing family dynamics without asking permission. That afternoon, I noticed myself simplifying my English around family. Not because they needed it, but because I did. Simple language reduces emotional distance. Complex language creates hierarchy. Here's a useful family habit. Choose one shared English sentence per day. Something emotional but simple. Today was heavy. I feel proud. I need rest. Shared language builds shared reality. Later, we talked about routines. Routines are survival tools in new cultures. They tell the brain, some things are stable. Even small ones, same dinner time, same evening walk, reduce anxiety and improve communication. Studies show that predictable routines improve emotional regulation, especially during transitions. This matters for language learning too. A regulated brain learns faster. I also noticed how American family conversations often include encouragement. Praise is frequent, direct, sometimes exaggerated. Good job. That's awesome. For some cultures, this feels excessive, but it serves a purpose. It reinforces autonomy. When you hear encouragement often, you internalize permission to try and fail. That night, I thought about identity. In a new culture, families either cling tightly or loosen painfully. Healthy adaptation is neither. It's flexible closeness. English helped here, not as mastery, but as a shared experiment. We laughed at mistakes. We repeated phrases. We corrected gently. Language became play instead of pressure. This is crucial. When English becomes a family project, not an individual burden, shame decreases. And learning accelerates. By the end of day 8, I understood something deeply. Adaptation is not about speed. It's about alignment. Families don't need to adjust equally. They need to adjust together. Culture shock will test families differently. But when you slow down, listen across differences, and use language as connection, not comparison, something strong forms. Not just survival. Belonging. Emotional burnout. Have you ever woken up tired of trying? Not tired of work. Not tired of people. Just tired of holding yourself together. That was day 9 for me in the United States. The day when motivation quietly left the room without saying goodbye. Nothing bad happened that morning. That's what made it dangerous. Burnout doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives with numbness. You stop reacting. You stop caring how you sound. You stop correcting your English because you don't see the point. And that scares you more than failure ever did. I noticed it when I caught myself avoiding conversation. Not consciously. Just small choices. Taking longer routes. Pretending to check my phone. Answering with nods instead of words. This is not laziness. This is emotional conservation. When your energy is low, your brain cuts optional output. Neuroscience explains this clearly. Chronic stress depletes dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and reward. Without dopamine, effort feels pointless. Even things you love start to feel heavy. And language learning requires effort. That's why burnout hits English learners hard. Because English is not just a skill anymore. It's your survival interface. Every interaction costs energy. When energy runs out, avoidance feels logical. That afternoon, I tried to practice listening. I pressed play. 10 seconds in, my mind wandered. I replayed the same sentence 3 times and still didn't absorb it. Old me would have pushed harder. Day 9 me closed the app. This is where many people quit and blame themselves. But here's the truth backed by cognitive psychology. The brain cannot learn when it feels trapped. Burnout is a signal, not a flaw. It's your nervous system asking for recovery, not discipline. I sat quietly and realized something uncomfortable. I had been performing adaptation, smiling, trying, adjusting, but I hadn't rested inside the language. English was always effort, never shelter. So I changed the rule for one day. No improvement. No goals. Just exposure without expectation. I listened to slow English stories while doing nothing else. No subtitles. No checking. Just sound. When thoughts drifted, I let them drift. This matters because passive listening activates language networks without demanding output. It rebuilds trust between you and the language. Researchers call this low-stakes input. It lowers cortisol and allows learning to resume naturally. Emotionally, I felt fragile. Small things triggered irritation. This is normal. Burnout reduces emotional buffering. You react faster, feel deeper, recover slower. Here's a grounding technique that helped. Naming the state. Out loud. In English. I'm exhausted. My brain is tired. This activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces emotional intensity. Language, even simple language, regulates emotion. That evening, I thought about all the people who quit English not because they can't learn, but because they can't rest while learning. They turn the process into a constant exam. Burnout teaches a harsh lesson. Motivation is not a resource you control. It's a result of environment, safety, and pacing. If you're learning English and feel stuck, ask yourself this instead of pushing harder. Do I feel safe making mistakes? Do I allow days with no progress? Do I rest in the language, or only fight with it? That night, I slept deeply for the first time since arriving. Not because problems disappeared, but because my nervous system finally stood down. By the end of day 9, I wasn't inspired. I wasn't confident. But something important returned. Curiosity. Quiet curiosity. And curiosity is the opposite of burnout. Burnout doesn't mean you're done. It means you've been strong for too long without pause. And once you learn to pause inside the language, English stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like possibility again. Small English habits. Have you ever noticed how big changes rarely come from big decisions? They come from small, almost boring choices you repeat when no one is watching. Day 10 in the United States taught me that lesson the hard way. Not through motivation. Through recovery. After burnout, your brain doesn't want ambition. It wants safety. So instead of asking, how do I improve my English? I asked a softer question. What is the smallest English habit my nervous system will accept today? That question changed everything. I stopped chasing fluency. I started collecting moments. The first habit was ridiculously small. One sentence in the morning. Out loud. Before checking my phone. Something honest. Today feels quiet. That's it. No grammar check.
No correction.
Speaking first thing anchors language to your body, not your performance. Neuroscience shows that early morning speech activates procedural memory. Language becomes something you do, not something you evaluate. The second habit was listening while walking. Not studying. Walking. Movement regulates the brain. When the body moves rhythmically, the brain releases BDNF, a protein linked to learning and memory. That's why language feels easier when you're relaxed or in motion. I listen to slow English stories, familiar voices, familiar tone. Predictability matters. Your brain learns faster when it feels safe. I also changed how I read. No long articles. No news. Just short paragraphs. Signs. Labels. Menus. Real-life English. This matters because context-rich input builds intuitive understanding. Reading one menu every day does more for functional fluency than 10 abstract texts. Here's a habit most learners ignore: response practice. Instead of practicing speaking alone, I practiced responding. Simple phrases. Yeah. I see. That makes sense. These phrases reduce cognitive load in conversations and buy you time. Psycholinguists call this turn-taking support. It keeps conversations alive even when your vocabulary is limited. Another small habit was permission to repeat. Americans repeat themselves casually. So, what you're saying is, repetition is not weakness. It's alignment. Repeating helps you check understanding and reduces anxiety. It also slows the conversation naturally. I noticed my confidence growing, not because my English improved dramatically, but because my fear decreased. Fear is the real blocker. When fear drops, language flows. I also limited correction. No more fixing every mistake. Research shows that excessive self-correction interrupts fluency and increases stress. Instead, I let mistakes pass unless they blocked meaning. Communication first. Accuracy later. That afternoon, I realized something important. Small habits work because they bypass resistance. Your brain doesn't fight what feels manageable. That's why consistency beats intensity every time. Here's a practical daily structure you can steal. Morning, one spoken sentence. Daytime, listening while moving. Evening, one short reflection in English. One sentence. Not more. That's it.
No apps. No streaks. No guilt.
I also used emotion as a guide. If a habit felt heavy, I shrank it. If it felt easy, I repeated it. This trains self-trust. Language learning becomes a collaboration, not a battle. By the end of day 10, something shifted. English stopped feeling like a mountain. It felt like a path. Uneven, but walkable. The biggest change wasn't vocabulary. It was identity. I stopped seeing myself as someone learning English and started seeing myself as someone living in English. Even imperfectly. Small habits don't look impressive, but they rebuild momentum quietly. And momentum is what carries you through culture shock, burnout, and doubt, one simple sentence at a time. Staying me. Have you ever adapted so much that one day you suddenly wondered, wait, who am I doing this for? That was day 11 in the United States. The day adaptation stopped being technical and became personal. Up until then, everything felt like adjustment. Language, behavior,
tone, pace.
I was learning how to fit in. But fitting in has a shadow side. If you're not careful, you don't just lose habits, you lose reference points. And without reference points, identity starts to blur. I noticed it in small moments. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I agreed too quickly. I softened opinions before anyone challenged them. None of this was dramatic. But it added up. And one quiet question kept returning. Am I adapting or erasing? Psychologists describe this tension as identity negotiation. When you enter a new culture, your brain constantly evaluates which parts of you are safe to keep and which parts need adjustment. This process is exhausting because it never fully turns off. Language intensifies this. In a second language, you often sound more polite, less emotional, more neutral. Over time, that neutral version can start feeling like the real you, especially if people respond better to it. But here's the truth most language learners don't hear. Fluency without authenticity leads to burnout. You may communicate clearly, but you feel hollow doing it. That afternoon, I paid attention to moments when I felt most like myself. Not confident. Not fluent. Just aligned. Interestingly, those moments happened when I spoke slower, used simpler words, and allowed my natural rhythm to show. My accent. My pauses. My way of explaining. Accent is not a defect. It's a signature. Research in sociolinguistics shows that accented speech often increases perceived sincerity. People may process it slower, but they trust it more. That surprised me. I also noticed that Americans respect clarity of values more than similarity of behavior. You don't need to act American to belong. You need to be consistent. So I made a quiet decision. I would adapt how I communicate, not who I am communicating as. Practically, this meant something simple. I stopped copying phrases that didn't feel natural. I stopped forcing humor. I allowed silence. I allowed seriousness. When I didn't know a word, I described it instead of apologizing. This shift did something unexpected. Conversations became slower, but deeper. People asked follow-up questions. They leaned in. Not because my English improved overnight, but because my presence did. Identity stability matters for language learning. When your sense of self is secure, your brain takes risks more easily. Studies show that self-concept clarity reduces language anxiety and increases willingness to communicate. That evening, I reflected on the fear many learners carry. If I don't adapt fully, I'll never belong. But belonging doesn't come from imitation. It comes from coherence. You can adapt your tools without abandoning your values. You can learn cultural norms without dissolving your personality. Here's a grounding exercise that helped me stay centered. Write 3 sentences in English that describe you, not skills, not roles, values. I value honesty. I value calm. I value depth. Read them out loud. Let your English carry your identity, not replace it. I also noticed something subtle. When I stayed myself, misunderstandings became easier to handle. I didn't take them personally. I explained calmly. That confidence communicated more than perfect phrasing ever could. By the end of day 11, I felt lighter. Not because adaptation was complete, but because the internal conflict eased. I wasn't choosing between cultures. I was building a bridge. Staying yourself doesn't slow adaptation. It stabilizes it. And when your identity is stable, language becomes an extension, not a mask. Hopeful ending. Have you ever reached the end of something and realized the ending doesn't feel loud, just clear? That was day 12 for me in the United States. 2 weeks after arrival. No fireworks. No dramatic transformation. Just a quiet sense that I was no longer fighting every minute. And that, surprisingly, felt like victory. I woke up that morning without the usual mental checklist. No pressure to improve. No urge to measure myself against yesterday. I simply noticed that English was already there. In my thoughts, in my routines, in my reactions. Not perfect. Not polished. But present. This is what adaptation really looks like. Not confidence. Not fluency. Stability. Psychologists call this phase integration. It's the moment when the brain stops treating the environment as temporary. When effort drops because prediction improves. You don't need to analyze everything anymore. You start trusting patterns. I went outside and noticed the weather without reacting to it. The climate was no longer an obstacle, it was just information. I greeted someone casually. They greeted me back. No overthinking. No self-monitoring. Language flowed because attention moved outward, not inward. This is the hidden goal of learning English through life, shifting focus from how you sound to what you're doing. When language becomes background noise instead of foreground stress, you've crossed an invisible line. I thought about the title of this journey, Overcoming Culture Shock. Can you adapt and stay you? 2 weeks ago, that question felt heavy. Now it felt answered, not intellectually, but experientially. Yes. You can adapt. Yes. You can stay you. But not by force. You don't overcome culture shock by winning against it. You do it by letting it reshape you gently, without resistance. That afternoon, I reflected on the biggest myths people believe about learning English abroad. That struggle means failure. That comfort means stagnation. That fluency means confidence. None of these are true. Struggle is adjustment in motion. Comfort is recovery, not laziness. And confidence comes after repetition, not before. There is solid science behind this. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, depends on stress followed by rest. Too much stress, learning shuts down. too much comfort, growth slows. Adaptation lives in the rhythm between the two. That's why the last 2 weeks mattered so much. You know what's truly scary about learning English? It's not mispronouncing words. It's not missing a sentence. It's the quiet fear that while you're changing, you might be losing yourself. If you're living between 2 languages, between 2 cultures, between who you were and who you're becoming, this story wasn't made to teach you English. It was made to remind you, you are not lost. English doesn't take away who you are. It simply asks one question. Can you bring your real self with you? On this channel, the next videos will continue this journey. Slow, clear English stories based on real life in the United States. About culture shock, love, marriage, family, children. About days when motivation disappears. And small moments that quietly give it back. If you want to practice listening, reading, and speaking English naturally. If you believe in learning English through real stories and real emotions. If you're tired of being rushed, judged, or pressured to sound perfect. Subscribe to this channel now. And if this story felt familiar, please like the video. It helps YouTube show this space to people who are learning English slowly, deeply and honestly just like you. Turn on the notification bell. Because the next story might be the one that helps you keep going when you feel close to giving up. Overcoming culture shock. Can you adapt and stay you? Yes, and this channel walks with you.